Hello, everybody. Welcome back. My name is Aaron the Sloth, and welcome to our budget-friendly home lab series. In episode 2, our previous episode, we deployed our pfSense firewall, and today we're going to be adding a Windows Server 2019 to our environment, which will become our first and probably only domain controller, which we will be going more over in episode 4. So let's talk roadmap. Here we have our Miro board, which we will be utilizing as our roadmap. Again, Miro is fantastic for brainstorming your ideas. Please sponsor me. As a new user, you get access to 3 individual boards that you can use for anything you want. Please sponsor me. You could use this for anything such as presentations to your management, mapping out ideas, etc., etc. Please sponsor me. Anyway, so here we have our entire home lab setup. This is essentially what we're going to be working towards. This is by no means the end-all be-all, so there's always room for improvement. This is what I've deployed previously. So as you can see, I needed to rebuild Seam Lin 002 at some point. When we deploy Seam Lin again, we're just going to name it 001 since this is a brand new environment. Likewise with DC Win 001, I'm probably actually going to change this real quick to 10.10. Don't ask me why, I just feel like 10.10 is what it should be. Likewise, whenever we get to our client machines here, our first Windows client machine is going to be 10.100. Our Linux machines will inevitably be 10.200 and then 10.201. Naming conventions are what you want to utilize whenever you're building lab environments, real life environments, what have you. And obviously we've got our inventory here, so we've got our host machine, our internal network, and so on and so forth. So you can see we're going to have our Sloth internal network. This is going to be everything that's internal to the sloth.lab domain that we will inevitably build. We've also got an isolated network whenever we deploy our malware sandbox tools. We're also going to be utilizing a Seam relay to send the logs from the malware boxes to our Seam. I've also notated Sloth external where we will deploy a Kali Linux attack box. Note that this is literally just external to the network. It actually has nothing to do with the internal lab domain environment whatsoever. It could just as likely literally be out here where we attack from the internet. But for note-taking purposes, I've went ahead and just put it there, which I can actually just see that back to its original spot, right? Yeah, okay. Making sure. So in today's episode, we're just going to be deploying DC Win 001, doing some initial installation. However, the actual configuration of ADDS is going to come in the next episode, so stay tuned. Also down the line, we're going to be deploying Seam Lin 001, which is going to be our Waza machine. And actually, we will inevitably be doing cloud configurations or hybrid configurations, such as use of Azure resources, AWS, or maybe even GCP. Those will come in later videos. I'm going to have an individual video on each where I go into a deep dive of Azure, deep dive of AWS, and a deep dive of GCP, services and offerings, etc., etc. But again, this is a low budget, cost friendly lab environment, so we're going to make sure that we're going to be utilizing any free resources that these cloud environments have, low cost resources, so on and so forth. This is just to simulate as much of a real world environment as we can, while also keeping costs at a minimum. Because in real world environments, you're not going to have an only on-prem environment. Some cases, maybe. You likely will see hybrid environments where you have on-prem infrastructure and cloud infrastructure. There are even some environments that are cloud-only infrastructure. Again, those are rare circumstances, in my opinion. So first off, let's actually download the Windows 2019 Server ISO file, which a quick Google search gave me this URL, Microsoft.com, Windows Evaluation Center 2019. Now, the link for this is going to be in the description below. So here we have a general overview about the trial experience Windows 2019 offers. This evaluation version is free for up to 180 days, where you can make use of Windows Server 2019 services. There are several different ways to actually deploy Windows Server 2019, such as through Azure, downloading the ISO, or also downloading the virtual hard disk. We are going to go ahead and just download the ISO. So I've already went ahead and registered for my free trial. because essentially all this does is you're giving Microsoft your information and then they provide you with the ISO download. I actually already have the ISO downloaded here within my OS backups. I've got things like CSI Linux, Kali Linux, Parrot OS, etc., which will come in later videos, so stay tuned. But since we already have the Windows 2019 Server ISO, let's go ahead and install this bad boy. Also note that since the ISO is only 180 days of a free version, you can also copy your DC from one to another, essentially redeploying your domain controller, giving you another 180 days. So you can get used to this process for cloning your servers and redeploying them as needed, just like in real world environments. There are times where you need to deploy a perfect replica of a server, maybe for a lab environment, maybe for backups and recovery. I don't know your circumstance, but these are real world environment situations that you can run into, and you can deploy a lab environment to test those features out. So before we get into Windows Server 2019, let's talk about another potential cost-effective option, such as Samba AD. Now, I've used Samba AD previously. That was actually the very first server that I deployed within my virtual lab environment. However, I quickly realized that Windows Server 2019 took the cake completely when it came to hosting a domain controller and Active Directory domain services. So you can go through the AI overview if you'd like. However, I do have a screenshot of the different features and support with Samba AD versus Windows Server 2019. So in my opinion, Samba is fantastic for getting your feet wet and learning how Active Directory works. Essentially, its best features is that it's open source and it's very lightweight. However, it lacks the full support that Windows Server 2019 offers, like group policy management, Active Directory integrated DNS, and advanced OU management. Windows Server 2019 gives you everything, essentially the actual tools that you'd be using in a real world environment. So even though it takes up more resources and is only a free trial version unless you purchase the software, I feel that Windows Server 2019 fully prepares you for what your day to day will look like as a systems admin or even a systems engineer or even a security engineer. So, in my opinion, you can look at Samba AD like you've got training wheels, whereas Windows Server 2019 is your full bike. So, again, I've got this breakdown here. Essentially, Samba AD gives you some basic emulation, Active Directory protocol, whereas Windows Server 2019 gives you full native support. Also, Samba is command line driven, whereas Windows Server 2019 has a GUI interface for you to interact with. Group policy is also extremely limited in Samba, but Windows Server gives you full support. DNS and DHCP is a very manual setup. Samba AD is very nitty gritty when it comes to its installation and configuration, but Windows Server 2019 offers built-in role installations. Very seamless and very easy to do for new users. So again, Samba AD is very lightweight, and you love that it's lightweight and doesn't cost a lot of system resources, then use Samba. Again, Server 2019 is very resource heavy, but it's realistic. It's what you're going to see in most environments. I dare to say 99% of environments out there are using Windows Server 2019. I don't know of any environments that are just running straight Samba. So again, Samba AD gives you a very good introduction to Active Directory concepts. So use it as much as you want. Absolutely use it. However, I wouldn't really make it a primary. If anything, I would use the Windows Server 2019 as your primary domain controller and use Samba AD as a backup. So anyway, let's go through actually installing Windows Server 2019. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually relaunching our firewall because this is our perimeter device. This is what is going to allow all internal network virtual machines to connect to the outside world, i.e. the internet. So we want to make sure that this is always up and running. So we see the services are running just fine. Everything is operating as expected. Let's launch shell, and we're also going to make sure that we have network connectivity out to the internet. Now note Linux systems will always ping infinitely unless you tell the command to not do so, or you manually stop the ping process as I've done here. So as we can see, we have 0% packet loss, which means we have network connectivity out to the internet. It's always a good practice for whenever you create new systems that you test network connectivity to make sure everything is working as expected. Let's go ahead and create DC Win 001. We're going to put it with our other virtual machines here in my A Storage Lab Series new group. I don't know why I did that. Why did it do two new groups? A Lab Series new group, and make sure we select the ISO file. Make sure your edition is the desktop experience. The core version is totally fine for lab environments everywhere, also totally fine in real world environments. However, since we're going to be doing a lot of the configuration through the GUI interface, or rather, I would prefer to interact with the server through the GUI interface, I'm going to go ahead and opt for the desktop experience. Honestly, selecting the edition here really doesn't matter per se, because whenever you go to actually install the software, you're going to make the selection again. I go ahead and skip the unattended installation because I want to attend the installation myself. I'm going to go and give this 8 gigabytes of RAM and 2 CPU cores. I'm also going to bump this up to 100 gigabytes of storage and finish. Next, we go into the settings, network. Make sure that we have internal net selected. Make sure we're using our lab net network. Make sure we set promiscuous mode to allow all. We shouldn't need adapters 2, 3, and 4 because, like I said, we want to make sure our firewall is our perimeter device, such as our mirror board shows, which essentially means our domain controller is not connecting to the outside world itself. It's going to use the firewall as the intermediary. That is because whenever we deploy our SIEM solution, our WASA SIEM, we want to make sure that all firewall logs, all traffic is going through the firewall and then routed properly to the SIEM, Security Information Event Management System. But again, all of that in a later video. For now, we're just focused on the domain controller. So now that we have our network set up, we can go ahead and power on the machine. So one thing to note, this is going to be our lab's backbone server. Later on, we're going to assign it DNS, group policy, and more. So we want it to run stable. That's why we opted for 8 gigabytes of RAM and 2 CPUs. This is where we select our language. Mine's English, everything is English, US. Install now. Again, this is where we want to select desktop experience. The standard evaluation version core is recommended because it omits the Windows graphical environment. However, you do manage with a command prompt and PowerShell or remotely through Windows Admin Center. But I'm not going to be worrying about all of that because this is the only server internal to our network. We're just going to be using the desktop experience. It's what you're going to experience in real world environments and in Windows-based environments, people are going to be using this desktop experience. I think 9 times out of 10. I could be totally wrong. But in my experience so far, we've used desktop experience. Accept the licensing terms. I'm going to go ahead and just select custom install because it's going to format the drive. So more on the licensing while we have time while this installs. You can utilize third-party websites for the software. For the software license, it is way cheaper, like 99% off cheaper. As we saw in a previous video, the license for Windows servers are extremely high, which is why I opted to use Samba AD rather than Windows Server 2019 when I first was building my lab environment. These third-party vendors come with an associated risk, and you need to know these risks before you just go out and buy software licenses willy-nilly. Note that a lot of these third-party sellers could be using the same license key for all of their sales, which is why you'd probably see a Windows Server 2019 license key for like 10 bucks on a lot of these third-party seller websites. That's fine, especially for a lab environment, but in a real-world environment, you want a clean key. So don't use pirated software, especially if you work for a big organization and you make lots of money using Windows operating systems. You want to make sure your Windows licenses are clean so that if Windows detects, hey, you're using pirated software, they can sue your ass and will come after you. So please do not do not use third-party sellers for Windows keys unless it's for something like this, a lab environment where we're not doing anything public facing. So essentially this is just a legal disclaimer where I'm saying use clean Windows licenses. However, this is just a lab environment internal to me and only me. It's not going to be used in any real world applications. So that's why I just go ahead and opt for cheaper licensing. As we can see, we're going through the boot up process now, installation process, all that fun stuff. I'm just going to give this built-in administrator a basic password, one capital letter, some numbers, and an exclamation point. Not like it really matters. We will end up disabling the built-in administrator later on whenever we deploy Active Directory and build our own admin user, but that's going to be in the next episode. So when it asks you for press Control Alt Delete, don't just press it on your keyboard. Go to this input keyboard and click this Insert Control Alt Delete command. Punch in the password you just created, and boom, we have Windows Server 2019. So again, whenever you're ready to activate your Windows Server, if you are going to, like I said, there are third-party websites that'll sell you a key for like 10 bucks. If it ends up being a bum key, you can always just refund it. That's the generous part about these third-party vendors. But for real-world applications, like I said, use a clean Windows license key. I can't emphasize that enough. So now we're going to go through some basic configurations. Go ahead and click on local server. We're going to click on this computer name so that we can edit it. Click change. We're going to change the name to DC Win 001 so that our other lab machines, once we deploy them, they will know, oh, this server with this IP address is named DC Win 001. Now, obviously, in real world environments where you have a standard naming convention, you don't want to make it obvious that a particular machine is a domain controller. That's also known as your crown jewels. You know that those systems are going to be hammered once hackers find out, oh, that's a domain controller that hosts all of the data for the network. Essentially, these are the machines you want to protect. But we're going to get into system hardening in a later video. And also, we're going to be deploying the domain in a later video. So for now, we're just going to be changing the name and configuring the IP addressing. Yeah, I know I gotta restart the computer and all that stuff. Restart later. So as you can see down here, we don't have internet. I wonder why that is. Go and go to Control Panel, go to Network and Internet, Network and Sharing Center, change adapter settings. This is the only adapter, as we configured previously. Click on Properties and go to IPv4. So I don't think we have DHCP enabled on Firewall LIN 001. That's fine, there's no giant need for it, but we will manually set this IP address to 192.168.10.10. That's just to have a standard IP addressing convention. Oh, goodness. Okay, I'm going to move this over here. I totally forgot about my face kind of being in the way. Subnet mask 255.255.255.0. Default gateway. This is going to be the address for our firewall because our firewall essentially is our default gateway. It's what every internal lab machine is going to be using to connect out to the internet. So anytime we deploy internal network machines, we're going to be using firewall LIN 001's IP address as our default gateway. So set it to 192.168.10.1. Also, preferred DNS server. We will install DNS server services on this server, so we're going to set it to 127.0.0.1, but we're going to add an alternate DNS server, which is Google's DNS server, or 8.8.8.8. Go and click OK, and as you can see, now our machine is connected to the internet, and it's also asking us if we want other PCs to be able to discover this PC. Yes, we do. 100% we do. Now, if you are on a public network, no, you do not want your machine discoverable. Because as soon as your machine is discoverable, it's going to get hammered outside by external threats. So as you can see, it still shows no internet connection. That's fine. We just need to give it a proper reboot. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and restart. Go ahead and select hardware maintenance planned. Now, this is so that it logs the reboot within the event logs on the system. Eventually, we will configure syslog for this server to send data to the SIEM once we deploy the SIEM, so that in our SIEM, which is going to be Waza, we will know, oh, this system was shut down for this particular reason. Thus, the purpose of these options here. So that if a real world system security admin or security analyst is reviewing logs and sees, oh, DC Win 001 got shut down. I wonder why that was. They can go in the event log, see, oh, planned system maintenance, it was shut down by this user. It must be legit. So as we can see, we now have internet. Yay. Wait for server manager to boot up. Click on local server again, and as we can see, DC Win 001 is now the name of this computer. Work group, eventually we will change this to the actual domain, which in our lab environment it's going to be sloth.lab. But anyway, if we wanted to confirm that we had network connectivity, we're just going to open up command prompt. We're going to do ping 8.8.8.8. As we can see, we have the network connectivity. 0% packet loss means network connectivity is a go. We can also ping internal machines. So let's check to see if we can ping. Let's see if we can ping our firewall. As we can see, we have connectivity to our firewall. Always best practice just to go ahead and test network connectivity when you're setting up new machines. And that, ladies and gentlemen, wraps things up for episode 3. We now have Windows Server 2019 installed and prepped to become your lab's domain controller. In the next episode, we're going to be installing Active Directory domain services, and we're going to be promoting this machine to the domain controller. And then we're going to start managing our domain. So, like this video if this helped you, subscribe to follow the series, and comment any questions or tweaks to your own setup down below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next episode.